So good, so good, so good.
Everything you want for summer is at Nordstrom Rack stores now and up to 60% off. Stock up and save on the brands you love like Vince, Sam Edelman, Frame, and Free People. Join the Nordy Club to unlock exclusive discounts, shop new arrivals first, and more. Plus, buy online and pick up at your favorite Rack store for free. Great brands, great prices. That's why you Rack.
Support for The Middle comes from the Tyler Dickman Foundation, now matching your donations dollar for dollar for a limited time at listentothemiddle.com. Welcome to The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson. Our DJ Tolliver is here as well. And Tolliver, you and I are both millennials, which means that for most of our lives, we have been in the post-Cold War world order. In fact, do you even remember where you were when the Berlin Wall fell?
I believe I was teething, Jeremy.
Sure. Come on. You're older than that. Well, I was probably watching TV, but it wasn't the news. It was probably Saved by the Bell or The Price is Right or something like that. But the reason I bring that up is that there was just this huge global security conference in Munich where a lot of people were talking about a new world order. And the question is whether this world order will mean the same transatlantic partnership that has existed since the end of World War II. As you know, the Trump administration has been very critical of NATO. But in Munich, the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz said that alliance, NATO, is just as important in this new era.
In the era of great power rivalry, even the United States will not be powerful enough to go it alone.
Now, those comments came just about a month after President Trump threatened to use force, as you remember, to seize Greenland from Denmark, bringing NATO's very existence into question. The president has also said he wants to annex Canada, take back the Panama Canal, even take over Gaza. None of that has happened, but earlier this year, the U.S. did capture Venezuela's leader, Nicolas Maduro, and the president of the United States says the U.S. is now running that country. There is also, as we speak right now, a U.S. military buildup around Iran and, of course, the global trade war with friends and foes alike. So a lot has happened in our foreign policy under President Trump in this last year, and we want to know what you think about it. So, Tolliver, before I introduce our guests, how can our listeners reach us this hour?
Yeah, you can call us at 8444-MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. Or you can write to us at listentothemiddle.com or comment on our live stream on YouTube.
And joining us this hour, Nicholas Burns, the former U.S. ambassador to China and a professor of diplomacy and international relations at Harvard's Kennedy School. Ambassador, great to have you on the show.
Thanks very much, Jeremy. Great to be with you.
And Ed Luce is also with us, chief U.S. commentator at the Financial Times. Ed, welcome back to The Middle.
It's a pleasure, Jeremy.
So, Ambassador Burns, let me start with you. I first met you when you were in the George W. Bush administration in the State Department. You were also, as we said, ambassador to China. That was under President Biden. You have served under Republican and Democratic presidents. What is your sense of this moment in American foreign policy?
I think this is a dangerous moment. I think it's a moment where the United States, the American people, have to choose, are we going to be in the world, working on big problems like climate change, global health, trying to end the threat of nuclear war, or are we going to go it alone? And, President Trump has done some things that have been positive. Ending the Gaza war was positive, and he was the author of that agreement. I think actually he was right last year to bomb the Iran nuclear sites to prevent the Iranians from achieving a nuclear weapon. But he's gone it alone. He's disavowed a lot of our allies. You said, Jeremy, he threatened Denmark with war. And no NATO leader has done that. No American president would have dreamed of doing that over the last 78 years. He's turned our allies away. He's broken the bond of trust with them. And he has not been sufficiently tough on Vladimir Putin for invading Ukraine and on Xi Jinping for a variety of problems that the Chinese are causing. So I'm worried that the United States has, in a way, lost its way in foreign policy.
Ed Luce, what do you think? And, the president would say when it comes to being tough on allies that he doesn't want America to be pushed around anymore. What do you think about the overall foreign policy right now?
So I was in Munich last week for the security conference, and the talk there was extremely different to anything I've ever encountered amongst America's allies, Europeans, the Canadians. in my entire career. It wouldn't have been like this 3 months ago. But I think what had changed was what the French president Emmanuel Macron calls the Greenland moment. And the Greenland moment, of course, was when President Trump threatened sanctions on the European states, the 6 European states that had stood up with Denmark and Greenland to say, no, you can't take this by force. And Trump had then, in Davos, in Switzerland, in January, he'd taken the off-ramp on Greenland and said, okay, there is some kind of a deal here. It turned out to be a kabuki deal, but he took the off-ramp. But that was the moment where European leaders realized, well, if you stand up to him, then he backs down. But if you deal with him bilaterally, one-to-one, then America's so much larger that he will win, he will squash you. And I guess that sort of change really has changed the weather and the calculations. And so there's a sort of grittiness, there's a fearfulness about America under Trump doing another kind of Greenland moment, and whatever that might be, something random, something capricious, something not allied. But there's also an understanding that they're in it together now, and it's the rest of the West, if you like.
And Nick Burns, do you think that this is the kind of thing that if a new president of a different party comes in, then they come in and say, well, we're going, America's back. And, just as we've seen in the past, when the party that's in power changes, they say, okay, we're going to restore the way that people thought we were around the rest of the world. Or is this bigger? Is what Trump is doing going to be longer lasting even than his presidency?
I actually think it's both, Jeremy. It's a really good question. On the one hand, look at public opinion polls. The great majority of the American people support NATO. They believe that France and Germany and Britain are allies of the United States, and that Russia and China are not. But Trump has turned a lot of that in its head. As I said, he's been so critical of Europe on free speech. Well, one of the reasons why the Germans have hate speech laws is they don't want to see a Nazi party reappear the way it did 90 years ago. And he has been so much more critical of them, as has Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who spoke in Munich, than they are of the Russians and Chinese. This is a strange world. So in a way, no matter who we elect in 28, whether that's a Republican or a Democrat, I think the chances are that American president will look around and say, we need friends in the world. We need allies to contain Russian power in Europe, to limit what the Chinese are doing. And I think they will go back to NATO. And I think the Europeans, of course, will have no alternative but to say, okay, welcome back, if you will. We're going to stay in NATO, but welcome back to leadership. But it won't be the same because the American president threatened to invade a NATO ally. The American president, Donald Trump, has basically said that Canada doesn't have a right to exist. It's not sovereign. It should be our 51st state. Imagine that insult if you're a Canadian citizen. So I think it's going to be difficult to have full trust. And Ed, I think, eloquently has talked about why that's happened.
Well, and Ed, what about beyond sort of what the Trump administration is doing with allies? What about the intervention that we are seeing in Venezuela, where the U.S. now says it's running the country, it's controlling where the Venezuelan oil goes and where the money comes in, and as we speak right now, a buildup around Iran and a question of whether the United States is going to again attack Iran, maybe in a larger way than last year?
So the Venezuela operation, was, in military terms, a really impressive, in, out, shoot the guys around Maduro and take him out without any loss of American life. It was a pretty sort of classic commando raid. And Trump, of course, watched it in that makeshift situation room in Mar-a-Lago. And he said, it was like watching TV. And it went pretty much seamlessly. Whether that means that Trump and Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, are running Venezuela, now that's quite a different matter because the regime minus Maduro is in place. Now, they're permitted to sell more oil, and America has control of the revenues of that oil. Slightly unconventional arrangement where it's in some kind of account in Qatar in the Gulf. and no real sort of plan as to how it will be spent. But it's the same regime that Maduro headed. And so, applying that to Iran, and I think there is the tendency of Trump likes these quick operations where there are no boots on the ground. And as Nick pointed out, he did a pretty brutally successful few days of bombing of Iran last summer. This is quite different, though, what he's talking about, which is unless the Iranians really cave, and they're very stubborn on the nuclear talks, unless they cave, then he's going to go for regime change. And that's quite a different proposition than removing one guy and basically keeping the rest of the regime in place.
Well, and just before we get to phone calls, Nick Burns, let me just ask you briefly, because Ed brought up the idea of this account in Qatar where they are, bringing the oil money from Venezuela through this account. What about the fact that so much of Trump's foreign policy also has to do with certain people, sometimes in his own family, benefiting financially from the deals that are being made?
Well, the allegations are serious and they ought to be looked into. And it's a kind of a brand of presidential power that we really haven't seen before. I just wanted to say in Venezuela that, it's one thing to rebuild the oil industry, and they should, because that's going to be the lifeblood of the Venezuelan economy. But Maria Corina Machado won the Nobel Prize. She's a Democratic leader. President Trump seems disinterested in supporting the small d Democratic Party, freedom-loving party in Venezuela. If we want stability in a very important country in our hemisphere, we should want that country to be democratic, not run by Maduro's henchmen.
But of course, the leader of that opposition party was the one who won the Nobel Peace Prize that the president is very interested in for himself, and actually I think has her prize at the moment. Tolliver, Canada, which we've talked about, one of the closest allies of the U.S., has been singled out by Trump, and the country's prime minister has said Canada needs to rely less on the U.S.
Yeah, and Canada has been looking to China for economic opportunities. Listen here to Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney speaking on a recent visit to Beijing.
Mine is the first visit of a Canadian Prime Minister to China in nearly a decade. The world has changed much since that last visit. And I believe the progress that we have made in the partnership sets us up well for the new world order.
The enthusiasm. Wow.
It's Canadian, Tolliver. That's the way that they communicate. We'll be right back with more of your calls on The Middle.
Ready to soundtrack your summer? With Red Bull Summer All Day Play, you choose a playlist that fits your summer vibe the best. Are you a festival fanatic, a deep end DJ, a road dog, or a trail mixer? Just add a song to your chosen playlist and put your summer on track. Red Bull Summer All Day Play. Red Bull gives you wings. Visit redbull.com/brightsummer ahead to learn more. See you this summer.
This is The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson. If you're just tuning in, The Middle is a national call-in show. We're focused on elevating voices from the middle, geographically, politically, philosophically, or maybe you just want to meet in the middle. This hour, we're asking for your thoughts on America's foreign policy right now. Tolliver, again, the number to call in.
It's 8444-MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. You can also write to us at listentothemiddle.com.
I'm joined by former U.S. Ambassador to China, Nicholas Burns, and Financial Times Chief U.S. Commentator Ed Luce. And before we get to the phones, Ambassador, as we said, you were the ambassador to China. How is China reacting to Trump's foreign policy?
I think China sees as an opportunity. China wants to divide Europe from the United States. That's one of the reasons that they were happy to see these European leaders coming to Beijing. It also wants to weaken the United States. It's working with North Korea and with Russia to do just that. China's supplying most of the microelectronics that fuel the Russian war machine. North Korea's providing soldiers. And so in terms of the geopolitics of it, China wants to be number one eventually. They want to outpace us in the Indo-Pacific and eventually globally. This is an opportunity to do that. And if you listen to Xi Jinping, he represents China now as the responsible party protecting that global order that you talked about, Jeremy, at the beginning of the program. And he asserts that President Trump, with the tariffs, not working with anybody on climate change, is the irresponsible power. So they've taken advantage of this very cynically because, in my view, China is the big problem in the world in a lot of ways.
Well, and Ed Luce, we heard the Canadian Prime Minister saying he wants to sort of get closer with China. The United Kingdom is also doing a reset with China. Isn't that exactly the opposite of what the United States would want its allies to do?
Yes, and I think it's probably the opposite of what they originally would have liked to do. And I don't think, as you heard from the tone in Mark Carney's voice there, I don't think it was done with much enthusiasm. But Canada in particular, feeling that, the United States under Trump could do something drastic, up to and including, annexing Canada, and supporting, by the way, the Alberta separatists. There have been several State Department meetings with separatists from Alberta. And Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, mentioned to them quite sort of crudely in a TV interview. So if you're Canada, well, then you're thinking, who else is big enough to help hedge my bets against this America gone rogue? And so they are all making the pilgrimage to Beijing just to try and sort of balance off, a United States gone rogue with an opposite force.
Let's get to the phones. Janet is calling in from La Crosse, Wisconsin. Janet, what do you think of America's foreign policy under Trump?
Well, right now I am pretty disgusted with the policy and having a hard time even holding my head up as a USA citizen. He's not showing the whole country is not showing respect to our neighbors, to our allies, not at home, not abroad. That's my biggest message, is this total lack of respect that's being displayed, and which means he's not allowing others to make their own choice on their own future. I have a lot of family in Canada. I've been up there traveling. Yeah, I don't want to be the ugly American like we were some 20, 30, 40 years ago, and I'm not in this alone. We're all immigrants at some level and have left family behind in countries around the world. And right now I wouldn't want to travel to most of those countries. I'd be so embarrassed. I mean, the best that could happen is they would just shun me,
Yeah.
And I think this is going to last a long time. He's being extremely selfish. I'm glad somebody brought up the money of it. He's going after resources in countries and trying to build hotels and so on. So my bottom line, we need to get rid of a crazy person and return the United States to being part of a community, locally and globally.
Okay, Janet, we've got it. Let me take that to our guests. Thank you very much for that. Nick Burns, the reputation of the United States. We hear it right there from Janet. She's afraid to travel outside of the country right now, embarrassed for the country. We've been through the Iraq War, which obviously put a huge hit on the reputation of the United States around the world. I think she was referencing the Vietnam War from decades ago. But what do you think this moment means compared to those others?
It's important if a country that a country be credible in the world, admired in the world, respected in the world. And Janet, thanks very much for your comment, and thank you for what you said about Canada. We can't choose our neighbors as countries, but if you had to close your eyes and choose the perfect neighbor, I'd say two: Canada and Mexico. Neither of them wants to destroy the United States. We're symbiotically linked to each other economically and through our families, through people coming across the border. And contrast that, how lucky we are to have these two neighbors in one North American economy. Contrast it with China, 14 neighbors, and most of them live in fear of China. Russia, none of Russia's neighbors want to be with Russia. And I'll just say this, Jeremy, 25 years ago, it's a long time ago for some of your listeners, when we were hit hard on 9/11, I was the ambassador to NATO, and guess who called me first at NATO headquarters that day? The Canadian ambassador, David Wright. He said, we want to go into Afghanistan after Osama bin Laden with you. NATO rallied around the United States. You can't pay for that in the world today. It's such a gift to have allies that are democratic, that respect you, and that's what's at stake here. If we're not respectful, if we don't work with them, we lose that advantage over the Russians and Chinese.
Let's go to Danielle, who's calling in from Boston, Massachusetts. Hi, Danielle. Go ahead with your thoughts about America's foreign policy.
Hi, I just want to say I think it's incredibly dangerous for ourselves and other nations, but on a more positive note, I think it does signal the downfall of American imperialism and hopefully allows for burgeoning nations to take power for the first time.
So you think it's allowing other countries to do more of what they need to do by themselves without the United States? You're happy about that?
Especially what we're seeing, I would say, instead of focusing so much on former Soviet nations, focusing more on some BRIC nations, specifically South Africa, India, seeing some of those nations start to be able to take back their own securities and be more world powers.
Okay. Danielle, thank you. Ed Luce, what do you think about that? This is certainly an argument that Trump would make, that he's tried to get NATO countries to spend more on defense, try to get everybody to spend more on their own defense.
He has. I mean, I understand the sentiment about other great powers rising, and I think that's happening, the BRICS nations. But I think the imperialism point, what Trump's doing with Venezuela is a pretty explicit resource grab. There is no, as Nick sort of elucidated earlier, there's no real sort of attempt to justify any larger principle in this operation, because the regime, a very thuggish regime, has been left in place. And the democratic alternative, which was elected, has not been given any hope of a transition to democratic control. So this feels like a bit of an imperialist power grab, especially in this hemisphere, where Donald Trump has restated the Monroe Doctrine, but with what he calls the Trump corollary. And that appears to mean might is right, and if we want a piece of you, we're going to take a piece of you.
Do you think, though, Ed Luce, that at the end of Trump's term that the U.S. will have more territory than it did at the beginning?
I think this is the Greenland temptation. The argument was, it's a really important part of the new Arctic security environment, and the Chinese and the Russians ships keep turning up, and none of that actually bears any sort of test to reality. And America has all the rights to Greenland, to more military bases and critical minerals that it wants already. I think what Trump wants to do is emulate Thomas Jefferson, who, with the Louisiana Purchase, dramatically increased the size of the United States. Greenland is slightly larger than that purchase. Trump would therefore be number one in his mind in terms of real estate American presidents.
Jeremy, if I could just say to Danielle very quickly, Danielle, I live in Cambridge, just across the river from you, and I understand the sentiment. We need a stronger American role in the world, not weaker. An America that wants to be involved in climate change negotiations, that respects its allies. And the danger here is if we see a weak American role, we get a China-dominated world or a Putin-dominated Europe. That can't be in our interest.
I think that ding means that I should ask Tolliver if people have written in at listentothemiddle.com.
Joe in Chaska, Minnesota says, instead of rebuilding Gaza, which was announced today, President Trump should be investing in rebuilding America. Our housing, education, and infrastructure are a disaster. Billy in Savannah, Georgia says, in all caps, the U.S. without NATO is a free ticket to Chinese-Russian expansion. And Eileen in Tyler says, I am very concerned about Trump's military buildup against Iran. Are we getting ready for war? What would the international consequences of such a war be?
I'll take that to Nicholas Burns. What would the international consequences of a war with Iran be?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, it depends how that goes. I supported the airstrikes last year against the Iranian nuclear sites because it set them back, and it really disabled their immediate potential to become a nuclear weapons power. But I think that if President Trump is going to use force, he has to explain to the American people for what purpose. Is this just going to penalize them for not being forthcoming in the negotiations? Is he trying to change the regime? This is going to be very important. The Iranians have some power. They can strike back against the U.S., against Israel. So I think he needs to be more transparent with the American people on that particular issue.
Let's go to Ron, who's calling from Kansas City, Missouri. Hi, Ron. Go ahead with your thoughts about America's foreign policy.
Okay, I think Trump is on the right track. I think there is a real threat from communist China, and we got to make that, we got to point that out, that it is communist China. They follow Marxist-Leninism. The other thing is, Zelensky does seem to have sympathies with neo-Nazism. They are, so I think that's a good
Ron,
thing.
Ron, I just want to point out that you're talking about Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, who is Jewish, by the way.
Well, I think he's a very plastic person myself. But anyways, he does have sympathies with neo-Nazism in Ukraine. I believe what I see from what his name is, the Prime Minister Lavadov say, that they are kind of persecuting Russian-speaking people there. They believe that the Russians are an inferior people. Okay?
Ron, can I just ask you one follow-up question? Because you said you were talking about China. Do you think Trump has been tough on China?
Not as tough as he should be, myself. But I think he's in the right. I think he's in the right direction. I think the capturing the Maduro was the right thing to do, actually, to prevent the spread of this Marxism throughout South America, Central America.
Okay, Ron, thank you very much for that. Ed Luce, when I hear that, and he's connecting a few different things there, but the fact that he brought up Venezuela and a socialist government in Venezuela after talking about communist China, if you walk around South Florida and you say the word socialist, you can win an election because that's what people don't want, and it's because of the connections to Venezuela and all of that. What do you hear there from Ron? Because there are a lot of people in this country who probably agree with exactly what he was saying there.
Yeah, and I understand his point about Venezuela and about China's, Marxist-Leninist authoritarian system. But I do take great exception to his characterization of Zelensky as being sympathetic to neo-Nazis.
Right.
I think this is a direct product of disinformation. And with all due respect to the caller, Zelensky is a democratically elected president of Ukraine. He faces a fearsome opposition. He has a free press. He is himself a Russian speaker. First, that's the home he was raised in. He was a comedian before he became president. He used to do comedy tours of Russia, knows Russia very well, does not think of them as inferior. It is Russia that has invaded Ukraine, not the other way around. And I feel we have to push back very strongly against this, wherever it comes from, this disinformation. It's a real misconception to say that Ukraine has a president who is pro-neo-Nazi.
Mm-hmm. Let's go to Bill in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Bill, what do you think of the foreign policy of the U.S. right now?
Not a whole lot. I don't disagree with everything, but let me start with a quick thought from a previous caller. When you start with communism and you allow private property and contract law, you don't have communism anymore. You have fascism. But as to the foreign policy, it used to be that we tried to follow, in a word, the Declaration of Independence abroad and at home. Not perfectly, but those were our ideals. That's no longer true, both abroad and at home. Now it's me, and us, and us is not everybody. Like Aldous Huxley said, some people are more equal than others. So that's my take on the overall foreign policy and domestic policy.
Yeah, Bill, thank you very much. Nick Burns, me, not us. I mean, it gets to the point we've been talking about, sort of a backing away from U.S. allies and multilateralism and going towards a more unilateralist approach, which, by the way, does go along with kind of what President Trump was saying he wanted to do in the campaign.
I thank Bill for his comments. I think he's right. There has to be a higher purpose to our foreign policy. We've been best in the world when we've tried to extend our ideals. And right now, President Trump has said very plainly in Saudi Arabia, I am not going to talk about human rights. I'm not going to judge you. And he's failed to agree that we should be trying to promote the spread of democracy. We talked about the example of Venezuela, where he kind of threw the opposition leader, the Nobel laureate, under the bus and said she doesn't have what it takes to run the country. We are at our best, and I think people look up to America most when we identify with their pain, when we identify with the shortcomings that they see in the world, and human rights and democracy promotion are a very important part of that, totally missing from this administration's foreign policy.
Well, and even what may happen in Iran doesn't seem to really be about the massacre of civilians by the government, but rather about the nuclear program and trying to keep Iran from getting a nuclear program. Tolliver, as we've heard, one of the boldest foreign policy actions under Trump was the military strike that seized Maduro from power.
Yeah, it happened on a weekend and surprised the world. Surprised me just then, as did this statement right afterwards from President Trump.
We're going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition. So we don't want to be involved with having somebody else get in, and we have the same situation that we had for the last long period of years.
The president of Venezuela, as we've said, is now Delcy Rodriguez, who was Nicolas Maduro's vice president. The U.S. is now controlling Venezuela's oil exports and notably keeping any Venezuelan oil from flowing to Cuba. We'll be right back with more of your calls coming up on The Middle.
Did you know if your windows are bare, indoor temperatures can go up 20 degrees? Get ahead of summer with custom window treatments like solar roller shades from Blinds.com and save up to 45% during the Memorial Day Early Access Sale. Whether you want to DIY it or have a pro handle everything, we've got you. Free samples, real design experts, and zero pressure. Just help when you need it. Shop up to 45% off site-wide right now during the Early Access Memorial Day Sale at Blinds.com. Rules and restrictions apply.
This is The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson. This hour, we're asking for your thoughts on America's foreign policy right now, from Venezuela to Iran to Ukraine. I'm joined by Financial Times chief U.S. commentator Ed Luce and former U.S. ambassador to China, Nicholas Burns. Our number is 844-4MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. Or you can write to us at listentothemiddle.com. Before we get right back to the phones, Nick Burns, if you think back to the global events that were most impactful over the last several decades, they were unexpected. 9/11 you brought up earlier, COVID. How prepared is the U.S. under Trump, amid all that we've been talking about, for an unexpected global event that will require action?
Well, it's really hard to say. It depends on the event. I would add to that list the global financial crisis of the autumn of 2008, the meltdown of markets and possibly the global economy. Look, I think he's got some good people around him, some experience, the Secretary of the Treasury, the Secretary of State, for instance. You also have actually a lot of experienced, very commonsensical members of the Senate from the Republican Party who exert some influence in a crisis like this. We, in the permanent part of the government, the Foreign Service, I was a member of the Foreign Service, we served both parties, the Pentagon, they're going to be able to react. We need a leader who can obviously get us through these crises. I remember George W. Bush, what a really fine leader he was in the weeks after 9/11. He had a stratospheric level of support in our country because he said the right thing. He said we can't demonize Muslims. We can't take it out on Muslims, but we're going to take it out on the guy who attacked us, Osama bin Laden. That had a lot of resonance. It was wise, too. And he tried to unify the country. So a lot will depend on the leader in a crisis like this.
Well, and speaking of members of Congress, Ed Luce, we were wondering as we were preparing for this show whether we should say, what do you think of America's foreign policy or what do you think of Trump's foreign policy? And they are the same thing right now, but at the same time, Congress hasn't really been very involved in much of what's been going on at all. In fact, he's kept a lot of the things that have happened, like the Venezuelan capture, secret from members of Congress before they happened.
He has. In fact, Steve Bannon, his former chief strategist who has his War Room show every morning, refers to Congress as the Duma. And the Duma was the sort of rubber stamp legislature in Tsarist Russia, in the Tsar's Russia before the revolution, which is a very eloquent way of saying it's not doing its job. Now, I think Nick is absolutely right. There are restraining voices behind the scenes amongst some Republicans in the Senate. But the Democrats, are obviously the minority party and are therefore impotent to do anything except use their voices. And so we have a situation where there isn't any real oversight of an administration that's behaving very unconventionally and taking quite a lot of kinetic action, and potentially in the next few days or weeks in the Persian Gulf, very dramatic kinetic action, and no real oversight. This is the first branch of government, but it's not really acting like it right now.
Well, and by the way, the Supreme Court, which has the tariff policy in its hands, seems to be taking its sweet time and making a decision on whether those tariffs are legal as well. That's the other branch of government. Let's get to the phones. Julia is calling in from Pittsburgh. Hi, Julia. Go ahead, but keep your language good. Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I'm from Pittsburgh, and I was intrigued by your show because I am middle of the road. My parents are Democrats. I married a Republican. I registered as an independent when I was 18, and so I look at all these things and I see. I also traveled a lot. That's really not important, but I look at these things, and there are so many underlying repetitions of things that we've done in the past. So when I've traveled in 2003, people didn't like Americans. It's not just because of our foreign policy, but right now it just seems so hyperbolic just intense because of Trump's rhetoric and the way that he speaks. And my husband keeps telling me, "Oh, he's just being funny," and I'm like, "Well, it's really not that funny." So I just, I breathe, and then I kind of take it through a lens of maybe it's humor, but I don't understand it necessarily, and I never will. But I'm just kind of putting that out there in the wavelength because it has been a really good relationship for both of us. Like I've shown him things, and he's. Not so much, but All
right. Well, Julie, thank you so much for that. And Nicholas Burns, I guess the thing that comes up to me there is a lot of times when Trump says something, then his people say, "Oh, he was just joking about that." Is it difficult for the world to know what's real and what's not real coming from this White House?
Well, I think it is. In fact, that's what I was thinking about, Jeremy, when I was listening to Julia speak. What works in the campaign trail in our kind of very free, open society doesn't often work overseas. And, respect is kind of the common denominator of what works in the world. So if you, again, say that Canada should be the 51st state, or if you go after the Prime Minister of India, for instance, or if you put high tariffs on Japan and South Korea, it's taken very badly. And I think the presidents, I'm thinking Ronald Reagan, who've done well, John F. Kennedy, Barack Obama, George H.W. Bush, there was a decorum, there was a dignity. You didn't always agree with them, but they showed open respect. That's what we would want in our families, in our personal relationships. That translates into international politics, that lack of respect, that kind of left hook and right jab, which really doesn't work very well when you're talking to foreign publics.
Ricky is calling in from Nashville, Tennessee. Ricky, what do you think about America's foreign policy?
Honestly, I think that Trump is running our foreign policy the same way he ran his bankrupt casinos. And I think he's going to drive us completely into the dirt because there will be an incident where we're going to need other countries to help us, and they're not going to be there to help us. And I think if you continue to mock your allies the way that he has and treat them the way that he's treated them with the tariffs, and the Denmark with Greenland, and the Canada with being our state, our 51st state, I think all of these things are going to isolate our country, and it's going to be even worse. And we need wood from Canada. What's going to happen when we can't just get it the way we get it now? We're going to have to start paying more for this stuff. So everything's going to become more expensive in our country. Just the little bitty things that he thinks. We are a powerful country, but we're only as powerful as we are with the way we treat our allies that help us stay powerful. We are handing our country, we are handing everything over to China is what I think is happening, because they're seizing the moment. They're becoming trade partners with Canada.
Yeah.
All these other countries are going to embrace China, and it's gonna leave us with nothing. I think.
Ricky, let me ask you one question. You brought up the fact that things are getting more expensive. The one way that I would think most Americans would feel the foreign policy directly right now is with the tariffs, and we've just heard that the average family is paying $1,000 more per year because of the tariffs. Have you felt that yourself personally in Nashville?
Yeah, I mean, everything here is more expensive. I mean, I think all the commodities and all the foods that we used to get, everything's expensive. It's just, it is, groceries have gotten out of hand. I mean, you barely get a bag of groceries and you're already spending $30 for a bag. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
And I just don't see how treating our trade partners the way that he has with the tariffs has helped anybody in our country.
Yeah. Ricky, thank you for that. Ed Luce, your thoughts?
Well, I appreciate Ricky's comments. I mean, I think especially about whether it's trading partners or treaty allies, of which America has dozens of treaty allies around the world. And China, as Nick pointed out earlier, has one, North Korea. This gives America enormously increased power compared to when it's acting alone. It magnifies, it multiplies. Nick was NATO ambassador in 9/11. This is the only time that NATO's Article 5, which is the mutual defense clause, an attack on one is an attack on all. This was the only time in NATO's history that has been invoked. And it was the Europeans who said, we will come to your aid. And at least until the Iraq War, you were unanimously behind the United States. Then there was some division. And I think that a narrative has taken hold, not solely from Trump, but it's taken hold that the Europeans are free riders. And it doesn't really stack up against the facts. I mean, 100% of funding now for Ukraine is coming from Europe. But even before, during the Biden years, it was about 60%. And so the idea that they're entirely, dependent on the United States, it's a bit of a one-sided account. The United States is the biggest by far, but there are a lot of other people stepping up to the plate.
We haven't talked that much about Ukraine, and one of the reasons is because it hasn't changed much since Trump came into office. It's not one of the things that really changed. He said he was going to end the war on day one. Of course, it's still going on, still raging. But Nick Burns, how much is Ukraine, in your mind, part of sort of Trump's foreign policy right now? Because he's, even in recent days, been tougher on Ukraine than he is on Russia.
I think this is for all the marbles, this Ukraine crisis, the Russian invasion. If Putin gets away with this crime, he's not going to stop at Ukraine. I think the probability of some kind of an attack subsequently after that, maybe on Estonia and Latvia, our two NATO allies, maybe on Romania and Poland, is high. And, right now the administration is positioning itself as kind of a neutral mediator, it says, between Ukraine and Russia, but they're leaning towards Russia. We ought to be Ukraine's lawyer. And if we stood up with the European Union against Russia and inflicted some pain, sanctions on oil, for instance, that might be the decisive factor. We cannot let Putin redivide Europe on authoritarian lines. Ukraine's a very important country. It's important that we stand behind him. And as Ed said, we're not providing any assistance to Ukraine right now. And that is very much against the interests of our country. And Zelensky, I know someone spoke against him earlier, he's a hero, in my judgment, for standing up to Putin.
Let's get to Sam, who's calling in from Rhode Island about Ukraine. Sam, what do you think about the Trump foreign policy?
Hi, can you hear yourself echoing?
No, but go ahead. I can hear you, so go ahead and talk.
All right, perfect. All right, I have a couple things. First off, I want to say that bit that was just said about Ukraine, it embodies a lot of what I have to say. Second of all, I really want to see a bigger crackdown on the Black Sea fleet. They're making more money per year off oil than all of the funding that Ukraine has received from other allies in the entire existence of the war. Another thing is that I think America's decision not to sell and or give Ukraine Tomahawks is unbelievable in my eyes. I'm not like a single issue voter for Ukraine, but it is a huge thing that impacts the way that I vote, because one of my fundamental issues is that Russia is basically using collective punishment to some degree to make Ukraine not want to be at war. And that same experience hasn't been levied against the Russians, which I frankly think it should be. I am completely okay with Ukraine utilizing long-range strike munitions to take out energy infrastructure, to take out fuel, anything, just so the people so it can be an unpopular war. It's an incredibly popular war within Russia. I wouldn't say incredibly. It's a quite popular war.
Okay. Sam, we've got it. Thank you very much for that. And it sounds like Ed Luce, Sam agrees with Nick Burns that it's for all the marbles there in what happens with Ukraine.
Yeah, I strongly agree with Sam's sentiments. This is a country, though, that Putin believed was a sort of fiction, that they were really just Russians and they'd temporarily been detached from the motherland. And there were portions of Ukraine that thought that. Now it's pretty much unanimous. Ukraine has got a burning sense of nationalism, but also of the injustice of the sections of Ukraine occupied by Russia. 20,000 children removed and put into foster families in Russia, all Ukrainian language signs removed, all libraries purged. Putin is guaranteed they're going to fight for their lives street by street, not to permit that to happen to the rest of the country. So in that respect, Putin's lost his marbles. This is a failure. But of course it's a failure that could turn into some ghastly success if we lose our will to support Ukraine.
I'm going to sneak in one more call this hour. Let's go to Francisco, who's calling in from Greenville, South Carolina. Francisco, go ahead briefly with your thoughts about the foreign policy.
Yes, there is no context given to the war in Ukraine. In 2008, Ambassador William Burns, who was American ambassador in Russia, sent out a memo called the Niet means Niet memo, in which he warned, after his conversations with top Russian leadership, that the NATO expansion into Ukraine was a red line that Russians would not tolerate. And none of this context is offered in the U.S. coverage of the war in Ukraine.
But Francisco, what do you? Let me just bring you back to focus on what we're asking about here. What do you think of Trump's foreign policy right now?
It's appalling. It's appalling. What right does he have to go and kidnap a foreign leader and hold and take him to as prisoner? It's appalling. He's violating every single issue, every single international law. He's a criminal.
Okay. Thank you so much for that call, Francisco. I guess Nick Burns, let's pick up on what he said there about international law, because one of the things that has been very important about the United States in history has been that it follows rules and laws, and that we can all agree on what those are, whether they're international law or whatever. Do you think that that's being lost right now under President Trump?
Well, what Francisco said was that NATO should not expand into Ukraine. It didn't. I was ambassador to NATO, as I told you, in the first half of the 20s, and we decidedly said Ukraine is not ready for membership. It can be a partner. We gave Russia every opportunity to be a partner with NATO, and this excuse that Putin uses, that I had to invade Ukraine because of NATO, it's a fiction. It doesn't stand up to scrutiny. And, we did expand NATO into the Baltic countries, into Poland, into Hungary, and we liberated, by doing that, several hundred million East Europeans. If we hadn't done that, Putin would be in their countries right now. So separating fact from fiction is very important here.
All right, we have to leave it there. That is Nicholas Burns, former ambassador to China and a professor at Harvard's Kennedy School. We've also been speaking with Financial Times chief U.S. commentator Ed Luce. Thank you so much to both of you for joining us.
Thanks so much,
Thank
Jerry.
you.
And next week, we are coming to you from KUER in Salt Lake City, Utah, which, by the way, is the youngest state in the country in terms of median age. We're going to be talking about something that is very difficult for young people, especially right now, which is the housing market. Owning a home, no matter your age, we want to know how the housing market is affecting you.
The rent is too damn high. Remember that? If you've got thoughts, go to listentothemiddle.com and sign up for our free weekly newsletter.
The Middle is brought to you by Long Neck Media, distributed by Illinois Public Media in Urbana, Illinois, and produced by Harrison Patino, Danny Alexander, Sam Bermastas, John Barth, Brandon Condritz, and Marina Price. Our technical director is Steve Mork. Thanks to our satellite radio listeners, our podcast audience, and the hundreds of public radio stations around the country making it possible for people to listen to The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson. I will talk to you next week.